So as I mentioned, with trim sheets, you can basically decide to have one material, but with variations of pattern or repeating texture throughout, or you can have multiple materials or multiple surfaces and textures that you use and reuse. So one way to think of it is you're kind of looking at areas of a scene that might be repeatable and reusable, right? So in this example, there's this gold trim that which is applied up here, these sort of beading in here, this stone pattern applied repeatedly through here, and I'll show you how we can work with that inside of Maya. So the first step is to basically create your template texture. I usually recommend at least starting with 4096. That'll be the submission requirement. 72 pixel resolution is fine, 8-bit is fine. And basically what I usually recommend doing is that we select and start placing colors. So you can do this manually first, or kind of let the software sort of dictate if you want, or the texture you're grabbing dictate what you want for the colors. So I'm going to invert my selection, which is Control-Shift-I, hit Shift F5, and then I'm going to switch to a different color. So for this project, I would like you to try to choose 3 different textures that you'll use. So this is just, like I said, a rough-in of the zones that I plan on using, okay? So again, you'll have kind of texture or surface 1 in here, 2 in the green, 3 in the orange. And sometimes it doesn't have to be just these strips. They can be squares and other rectangles. So you can determine the shape, but for ease of explanation, I think I'll just stick to these kind of horizontal strips. So for this demo, I'm going to primarily show the Photoshop method, and it does require that you keep your textures together. So what that means is, like most textures, if you're talking about PBR, which is physically based realistic material, there's typically at least 3 maps that we want to kind of keep together, which is the specular or roughness map, the normal map, and the color, which may also be referred to as diffuse or albedo. So I'm just going to type in brick, for example, right? So maybe I'll have like 2 types of stone or brick, and then maybe some kind of concrete, okay? So let's try that out. Kind of go old Montreal style. The other thing I like to do is I like to, if you've seen me work, you notice that I often go like max res. Even though this is 4K, sometimes you have to think about the resolution and the scale of the texture. So if I want more bricks compressed into a smaller space, then I want to make sure I have a higher res texture that I can potentially scale inward. So by having a higher than 4K res, I can sort of scale it down and pack more bricks or stone or whatever the image is, and sort of pack more into the space that I have, okay? There's a variation here that's kind of like mossy, dirty. Okay, let's go back. I'll grab another one. Yeah, grab this one. And then let's say, yeah, I'll try concrete for now. Nice. Okay, so I'll try maybe something like this. Okay, so next I'll basically just navigate to a folder where this is downloading. I'll unzip this and get this ready. Okay, so I'm just kind of prepping things because I do want a folder structure for this. I'm going to go to Project Window under File Project. Actually, before I do that, let me just go to File, Set Project, and I'm going to just locate a folder where I want to put this. So I'll call this trim _ sheets, hit enter. Oops. Let me just make a new folder first for that. Call it trim sheet, there we go. Hit set to that folder. I'll say create default workspace, and then I'm going to go back to File, Project Window. It should be locating and pointing to this. I'll hit accept. And then again, usually just to make sure it's set properly, I'll go back to File, Set Project. And again, I notice it doesn't always set, so I'll go back in and hit set here. So now what that means is that every time I go back to this folder, it will locate it in the correct space. The other thing I want to do is grab these unzipped files that I have. So this, the brick, and the other brick. I'm going to cut this, go to my project folder, go to source images, and paste this in, okay? The other thing I'll do is I'll typically copy this path, go to Photoshop, go to File, Save As, and I'm going to just save this as a PSD in the location. So again, I'll call this trim sheets. Since this is the project, I would just call it trim sheet, but in this case, I might say like brick and wall 01 if you have lots of these. Sometimes you might have multiples of these. Okay, so that's kind of my basis right now. I'm going to basically drag in and I'll organize them as folders. So in this case, I'm going to just stick with essentially the roughness. Sometimes you'll have two different normal maps. I typically use the DX or DirectX normal map. It's a different way of this to be rendered. Some game engines, some render engines might prefer OpenGL, which is the GL version. But in this case, I want color, roughness, and normal. The main reason I bring these three in together at the same time is that if you move one, if you tile one, then you have to tile them all. I'm going to hit enter. I'll have to enter 3 times just to load these 3 in. Okay, hit enter. And then I'm going to basically organize these into folders. So I'll hit, move this out of the way. I'll create a new folder. Come on, you. Create a new folder. There we go. So I'll select all 3 layers with shift and then create a new folder. So I'll call this brick underscore 1. So like I said, if I'm deciding, maybe I want to try to squeeze these in more so I have more of these bricks, I'll hit Control T, which is your transform tool. And so if we left click and drag, you can try to scale these in. So I might want to pack in more variation. And I'll show you this in a second. So let me just go to View, Snap to, I'll turn on Snap. So what Snap does is it'll kind of like automatically, should in theory automatically, snap to the grid here, or snap to like the center point. For some reason it's not snapping to the center point, but let me just double check that. I'll go to View, snap to grids, layers, okay. Let's see. If you don't have guides too, sometimes I'll do this. I'll hit Control R, which is your ruler. I think you can also get that under View, Rulers. Control R is a shortcut. So usually if I drag out a ruler, so you do that by just going to one of these ruler bars, and usually it'll snap to the center point. So the reason I want snaps on in this case is that I really want to be precise with this and see if I can snap to there. For some reason it's being a little bit awkward, but there. Okay. So I'll take these. If you, V by the way is a shortcut to grab the move tool. If you hold Alt and left click and drag, you basically get a copy of this, all these layers. So I'm going to just drag that over. I'm going to zoom in. Control R, by the way, can hide your guides. Control Shift semicolon, is it? Or I'm going to go to Show Guides. Control semicolon, yeah. That can hide your guide. So a lot of times I'll zoom in just to make sure these are kind of syncing up well. So I'm just kind of sliding these around to get a bit of a match if I can. Okay. So next up, what I'll do is I will basically merge the 2 different color layers together. So I'll just reorganize a bit and right click, merge down. Where is it? Sorry, I'll select the 2 layers and just go to merge visible. So control click. You can right click and go merge layers, or hit Control E to merge. So I'll grab these 2, go to merge layers. There we go. So what we can do with this, there's a folder in here, right? So I know I want this maybe upper region to be part of this. So I'm going to go to select the folder and then click on layer mask. And if we zoom out a bit, I'm going to select the marquee tool, which again, if you hit M on your keyboard, it will select the marquee tool. And basically that allows me to just go in and select this region. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm selecting just that zone and try to get as accurate as I can here. So I'll select that region, and then if you alt click on this layer, it looks like I'm missing a chunk here, so I'll just grab that as well. Okay, so we'll select this, and you can hit Control I, which flips this thing around. Now, the way I think of this is that when you're looking at a layer mask or an alpha, the black is the area we're not going to see. So if you want that part to be invisible, I'll just click on the folder so we can kind of get back to the regular view. Now it's actually hiding that. I actually want to flip that around. So again, I usually click on the layer mask itself, which highlights it in a white box. Something I wish Photoshop or Adobe would change is that they would highlight this in some bright color. Same thing inside of Substance Painter, I noticed they do this. It's just like this thin white box, which doesn't exactly tell you that you're on the layer mask versus the layer itself. But if I select this, I'm going to make sure this is not selected. So Control D is to deselect. And if you hit Control I, it flips the mask around, right? So now we're staring at just this, okay? I'm going to just adjust the mask a little bit and just trim off a little bit because I think I had a couple little chunks in here that are a little off center. But I do want to make sure I kind of keep the grout line visible so that I can kind of sync that up. So, by the way, if you hit Tab on your interface, you can actually hide a huge portion of the interface. And if you hit F, that can really give you the power to kind of like zoom in and focus just on this area. And Alt scroll wheel zooms in. Control 0 will, I think, is it Alt Control 0? Yeah, Alt Control 0 gives you actual pixels. Control 0 frames the whole thing. So useful shortcuts when you're in this kind of mode. So again, I'm going to hold Alt and just remove a little bit from that selection. Yeah, just a little bit more. It's kind of hard to get in there, but I just want to get a more precise edge there, but not take out too much grout. Okay. So back to the interface here. I'll hit F, Tab. Okay. I'll select on this the mask. And I'll just go to Shift F5. And in this case, I just want to drop in some black. So I'll say OK. And you see that trims up the edge. Again, Control D to deselect. I haven't quite fixed the seam issue here. So sometimes what I'll do, just to touch up the visible seam in here, is I may duplicate this layer. So you can left click and drag that to another layer. And if we just offset this a bit, I'll again hit M for marquee, select this kind of middle range, flip the selection around. This time I'll just delete it, deselect. And so what I can do is use maybe like the eraser brush. So I'll hit E for eraser. And then you can kind of like blend in some of these edges. So we kind of like disguise the fact that we're kind of taking a chunk of this and using it to kind of heal out any weird visible edges, okay? So that's something that you can use, and then I would just merge this down essentially into the texture. In this case, I'm not too worried about it. It doesn't seem that bad. Okay, so I'll merge that down for now. Merge down. Now the rest of the selections, they might be a fair bit easier, so I'll go back in here and grab the other form of bricks, color, roughness, normal. So I'll close this up here, and I'll drag that into my workspace. And if it doesn't, I don't know, for some reason it doesn't always drag in correctly, but I'll try it one more time. Let's see. Just drag it maybe at the bottom here. Yeah, it just wants to open in here. So the other way you can do this is just hit Control A, Control C, copy, Control V, paste. So those are your shortcuts. Control A, select everything, Control C, copy, Control V, paste, Control A, Control C, Control V. And I'll select these three, again, put them into a folder. Hit Control T, and there you see the actual size here. So I'll just scale this down. Okay. And make sure I'm not missing any portion here. Hit Enter, and that should set this into the document properly. Okay, so usually, yeah, I'll have my kind of color on top typically. So I'll call this brick 2, bricks 2. And again, I'll show you a little trick. If you Alt click and drag this layer mask, so Alt left click and drag, this copies the layer mask up here. But what I want to do is flip it around. So with the layer mask selected, I'll hit Control I, invert. So now I've got that section appearing visible. If I want to nudge things around again, you have to remember to move all three textures together at the same time because you don't want the roughness and the bump map to be unlinked from the color map, okay? So I'm just going to make sure, let me just zoom in a bit here to make sure I don't have any gaps or anything. Maybe nudge it down a bit. So this is where you want to sync the file, is basically at the grout line. And similarly, I would sort of look for a pattern where maybe the brick ends not lined up to this upper row. So maybe a line that's kind of here. So maybe about here would be good. So I'll go to, yes, let's go to the layer mask. I'll hit M for marquee, and yeah, let's go up to about here. Again, mid grout, so it syncs up with the upper layer there. Let me just zoom in. That seems good. I mean, I'm clipping off a little bit of that brick, so I might just trim that back a bit. So holding Alt, left click and drag, and you can kind of adjust that selection. Okay, and then I'll make sure I'm, again, selecting the layer mask and hit Control I, which inverts the white area to black. Okay, and then the third section here, just create a new folder. Was it concrete, I think? Concrete. Jump into the concrete. Roughness, normal, color. Again, for some reason it wants to just open in tabs. Very annoying, but that's okay. Control C, Control V. It's funny with this sort of stuff when it's gray, you have to be very careful. This is the actual roughness. It doesn't look that different right from the color map, so Control V, Control A, Control C, Control V. Again, I'll put the color on top for now. And I'm okay with this as is. I might just kind of, yeah, I'll just go to the layer mask. So again, I'll just Alt click and drag this layer mask. Hit Control I with that selected, and then go hit M, select this upper section, and just to make sure it's filled with black, I'll just make sure that's done. And there are basically my three unique textures, okay? Now to save this out, I do recommend, I should save my PSD. I'll go to File, Save, okay. So in this case, all the color layers are visible, so that's great. I'm gonna just turn this bottom layer off just in case. I'll hit Alt Control S, and save this. And again, I'm going to source images. So I'm going to save it maybe as a PNG. So I'll save this as trim sheets brick concrete underscore COL for color. And it's easy to kind of have this naming scheme, okay? Do it for color. Then I'll go into, let's say just the normal. So I'll go into each folder, turn off the color, make sure the normal only is visible. Oops, there we go. Alt Control S. Usually I'll just, I'll switch to my file format, hit this, and then just copy the name, but add NRM for normal. Okay. And then we'll turn off the last, turn off the normals, and then just expose the specular or roughness. In this case, it's roughness. Alt Control S, switch to PNG. You can call it RGH or RUF, whatever you prefer. ROG is fine too, or ROU, whatever. As long as it's consistent, that helps. Okay, so back in Maya, I'm just going to put in a few basic objects. So for this scene, I want something that's column-like, and so we'll have kind of an extended cylinder here. Put in a simple ground plane. And then a cube. This is sort of to demonstrate how you might apply this in the environment, okay? So I'll scale this up. And these will need some divisions. That way we can have UVs where we split up the different sections of what might be a building, a wall, a floor, okay? So for the ground plane, let's just start the grid here. So I usually want each material applied twice, so that means you need at least 6 divisions, which means you'd have to have 6 height divisions, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can go higher. If you wanted 10, 12, whatever, that's fine. Same thing here. I'll go to the height divisions, and I'll go, let's say I'll just go with 6 for now. And here I'll just leave it at 10, but on one axis, okay? So for the UVs, what I recommend doing is eventually we'll sort of take these into chunks and we'll break them off, okay? But first I'll set up the material. I'll apply the same material to all three. So I'm going to basically assign my AI standard. So I'm going to go to Arnold. If you don't have it in your favorites too, I usually wind up adding this manually. So I'll middle mouse click this, click and drag this to the favorites, and then I'll just select it. So every time now you right click, every time you right click and say assign favorite, you'll see AI standard surface in there. Okay. So we'll be doing Arnold renders with this. So they all have the same material because we can reuse this. That's the part of this technique that's really great, is that we're essentially recycling the same material on multiple surfaces and in multiple parts of one object. So I'll hit open. If you hit 6, by the way, then you should be able to see the preview of that material. I'll go into specular under roughness, click on file, click on the folder icon, and then go to roughness. Open that. Then I'll do the same thing and go back and go to geometry, bump map, file, tangent space normal, make sure that's loaded as such, and then I'll go to normal, hit OK. Make sure you set this under color space, go to utility, and then raw, and that will show up much, much more accurately, okay? I don't recall, I have to double check this, but I think if we just put like a point light in and hit 7, is that right? Let me just undo that point. I just want a regular, yes, point lights. For some reason I have this like controller thing here. I don't want that, but so let's increase the intensity a bit here. So if you take a look now, as you move the light around, you see it actually casts and receives physically accurate shadows. So that's one of the huge advantages of normal maps versus like a grayscale bump map, is that you get physically realistic lighting interactions. So that's one really excellent thing, okay? One thing I want to show you too is that because I scaled these objects, sometimes we have a problem with the UVs. So let's say I go to hit UV here, and if I try something like automatic, so let's say on the cube is evenly scaled, but let's pretend it wasn't. So let's say I scale it up a bit this way. You see the texture stretching, right? If I were to go to UV and then hit automatic, it's still going to stretch. And one of the reasons is that the object, the UV tool assumes that this is actually still evenly scaled. So when you look at it at 100% or equally scaled on XYZ, it looks like this. But, right, you get this stretching problem if you're trying to do, let's say, auto UVs. So what I recommend doing with any mesh that you've modeled, if you've scaled it, at the very end, it's a good idea to go to freeze transforms and simply turn off everything but scale. So now when you hit this, and if you do something like UV automatic, it will actually scale it proportionally and correctly so you don't get any distortion in the texture, okay? So now we get to kind of the real part here. So again, I'm going to freeze this just before I continue. So I'll go to modify freeze, again, making sure just to do scale only. So a lot of times too, what I'll do is I'll go to UV. If it's something cylindrical, I'll basically use a cylindrical unwrap. It's a little bit funny in Maya, but you have these kind of two red cubes in the middle. You want to just kind of make sure it wraps all the way around. I'll just hit 6 so I can see the full texture here. So if I go back to UV editor, right? We don't see the tops and bottoms because the cylindrical unwrap doesn't account for the tops and bottoms there. So if you wanted to, you can just kind of select these faces. Do I have them all? Yeah. Let's see. Then you can just go to create planar. By the way, when you do this too, you can also go into the options and go to the checkbox. In this case, it's the y-axis, so it's like looking from the top down, and then you see the texture show up there, okay? So that's the way to deal with that. Let's do this one. Yep. Planar means flat. Planar is flat, yeah. I mean, it'd be distorted, but yeah. So now, I mean, if you want to, we can just kind of pack these in, okay? Or I can say, let's lay these out, okay? in this case, I don't actually care that much about the layout so much. What I want to do is kind of hack the system a bit here. If we check, so what I mean by that is, let's say I'm going to take the faces all through here. So let's say I want, oops, hitting the wrong button here. Shift double click. So let's say in this section I want to create my own island. So I'm going to go Shift right click, create shell. Now it's its own kind of floating shell, and I want this to be stone. So it doesn't matter in this case if they're overlapping. The other ingenious thing about this technique I want to show you is that you may not realize this, but this square, the texture that sits in the square repeats. So technically, yes, you can have an object sit outside of this square. And what's happening, if you go into view, is it view? I always forget. View or display, texture, image, sorry. Image, if you go to image range, this is just saying from 0 to 1, we're seeing this texture. So if I go, let's say -2, -2, +2, +2, you'll see that this texture technically infinitely repeats in every square. So that's why we can do something like called UDIMs, where we kind of unwrap a part of the object and then offset it one whole UV tile, is that it'll still recognize that, hey, this is going to pick up texture. And it's one of the reasons, too, we want seamless texture, is that we want to be able to just pick this up and avoid as many seams as possible. Okay, so if I scale this up, right, I can get this, I'm basically just positioning it to match with the grout line where it makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to do this, just slightly scale it back down. Okay, so now that's where this is sitting, right? So I'm actually even picking up more texture potentially than what was there, right? If I pull this over, you see I'm actually using fitting more texture into that zone, right? So it's a way to actually sort of cheat the system a bit. So let's say I just want maybe one row of brick, okay? Or maybe I'll go to the concrete first, and then I'll go to the brick. So I'll say create shell. So I don't have to do this in order. I can pick and say, okay, this is where the sort of concrete belongs, right? So I'll scale that up. And again, we can cheat. So let's say I want to try to densify this. So what I might even do is say, okay, maybe I'll take the middle row. I can create a new shell out of that. And so these are now 3 shells, you see? So I have 1 shell, right? 2, 3. You can actually even cheat and sort of say, okay, I'm going to right click, shift right click and say stack shells, and then scale these up. So it's actually going to have its own repetition, and I'm packing so much information in there, right? Now, I might have visible seams, I might not. I want to check. Are they kind of detectable? Yeah, I mean a little bit. But at a distance, will you notice? Maybe, maybe not. And one way I can also cheat this is to go to the shells and maybe just pick one. So I might just pick this one. And if I offset it a bit, maybe I can obscure the fact that these are repeating and using the same shell, right? So that's kind of one aspect to this that's really ingenious, is that you can, try to pack in a lot of detail. Usually I keep my groupings together. So in this case, I would keep this as one solid shell, okay? Just so I can avoid visible seams. So let me just undo until I have, just that one shell. And then I've got the other shell left behind, this one here. Now, because this has very even lines, right, I could sort of do the same trick that I just showed you, where I say, oh, maybe I'll split this in half or into a couple of chunks. So I'll say create UV shell. Now, the other great thing of this too is that if you do have a seam line, sometimes you can just move the shell so that you hide the seam. If it's on the back where you're never going to see it, who cares, right? You can hide that. So I think I'd probably scale these two together just to make sure I have a consistent pixel density, let's say. So then I'll slide this one over here. And again, just nudge it up so that the grout lines kind of sync up a bit better. Right. And there you go. You'd never know, right, that isn't one full texture. I've actually used the shell and repeated part of the texture in a different offset. So I basically repeat the process for the other objects. So this one I've already unwrapped. Again, I could either stack these since it's a cube, or you can, if you decided to, I'm going to just make sure I make these a shell. So let's just go to create shell. So these are separate. I'll turn off this preview for a second. So as I was saying, if you wanted to hide edges, you can also go to shift right click, move and sew, just so you kind of hide the seam somewhere in the back, which is fine. Or you can keep them as floating chunks and stack them, right? Because if they're individual polys, then you can pack a lot more information in there. So again, maybe I'll sort of decide like this is part of a lobby theme or a back alley theme. And so I'll keep the kind of organization the same. You don't have to, right? You can say, okay, this is brick over here and then concrete or whatever elsewhere. But I'll keep the theme consistent, let's say. Scale that up. Again, I usually kind of like to fall where it makes sense for this to fall, right? So the edges would be kind of on where the brick or the stone kind of meets up. So I'll just center that a bit better and then scale it. Now, for the project, I do want to see a few different regions where this is applied twice. So in this case, I'm going to, again, create my shells. Let's just turn this off for a second. I'll stitch these together again. I want to find kind of one or both of the front edges here. I'm looking at the wrong section, of course. Move and sew. Okay, move and sew. So at least I'm hiding my seam elsewhere, right? So yeah, sometimes the easy thing to do is actually to stack your shells together. Yeah, in this case, they're not scaled the same, but that's okay. I'll just roughly scale. And because I don't want this to look exactly the same, right? I'll just, offset it a little bit, right? So it's not the exact same pattern. Your eye will recognize or catch that, right? So again, really, really cool, right? Take these, kind of repeat the process, create shell, just put these over here. Okay, so I'll take these two shells. So this will be an instance where I actually stacked them before. So you could say stack shells, then scale them, right? Maybe I want to pack a ton of brick in here, so I'll do that. Oh, my brick lines almost happen to match up perfectly by pure accident. Or total scale, whatever. And then, like I said, I'll offset one of them so it's not the exact same pattern. And if I do ever catch, I'm like saying, there's a little weird, maybe I'm just seeing the mesh, but yeah, just in case, I'll pull this over there. Right, so we're not getting the exact same kind of brick in both locations. Basically going to repeat the process over on this. Again, you don't have to watch me do that. And I would do essentially the same thing here. Now, in this case, the UVs are twisted or turned. So what you can do is select this shell. Inside of there's a transform tool, and there's a kind of like rotate 90 degree option. It's under rotate, under tools. Simply click that so it's better aligned to your object. And then again, I'll sort of maybe create a couple shells, right? Let's shift right click, stack shells, and then scale to my preferred size. Okay, so it's a lot of rinse and repeat after a certain stage.